The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the soft vibration of 1,000 different atmospheric processors, each one calibrated to keep the various species comfortable in their designated sections. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus and watched as the holographic display showed the familiar blue-green marble that had become the most discussed planet in known space, Earth. "The motion before us today," announced High Counselor Morden, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns, "is the hegemony's request to establish mining rights in the Sol system's asteroid belt." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. Kethvar noticed how the normally boisterous Thraxian delegation had fallen silent, their chitinous shells clicking nervously. Even the proud Veltar warriors seemed subdued, their usual aggressive posturing replaced by an almost fearful stillness. "With respect, High Counselor," came a voice from the hegemony section. General Vexmore stood, his imposing frame casting shadows across nearby delegates. The hegemony had grown bold in recent cycles, their military might expanding as they absorbed smaller worlds and systems. "We're not requesting permission. We're informing the Council of our intentions." The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Kethvar felt his secondary heart skip a beat. In all his centuries of diplomatic service, he had never seen such arrogance displayed in the council chamber. But more importantly, he had never seen anyone so casually dismiss the one rule that every civilization in the galaxy had come to respect. "General," High Counselor Morden's voice carried a warning tone that made the air itself seem to thicken. "Surely you remember the Accords of Titan Station." Vexmore's laugh was harsh and grating. "Ancient history. A treaty signed in fear by our predecessors who had never truly tested human capabilities." Elder Zixani of the Wisdom Keepers slowly rose from her meditation pod, her ancient form supported by gravitic fields. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of millennia. "Young General, there are reasons why that treaty exists, reasons that predate your empire by eons." "Enlighten us, Elder," Vexmore replied, his tone dripping with contempt. The Elder's eyes, black as the void between stars, fixed on the hegemony delegation. "Before humans reached the stars, we explored their planet. We studied them from orbit for decades. What we found." She paused, her breathing apparatus cycling slowly. "What we found defied everything we thought we knew about intelligent life." Kethvar had heard fragments of these stories before, but never from one of the Wisdom Keepers. They were the galaxy's living memory, beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. "Their planet should have killed them," Elder Zixani continued. "Earthquakes that could level cities, storms that raged for days with winds that could tear apart our strongest vessels, volcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun for months, ice ages that lasted millennia. Any reasonable species would have found ways to avoid these catastrophes, to build safe havens away from such violence. Instead," her voice grew softer, forcing the entire chamber to lean forward to hear, "they thrived in it. They didn't just survive their world's attempts to kill them. They used those same destructive forces to grow stronger. They built their cities on fault lines, knowing they would be destroyed and rebuilt again. They sailed into storms that would terrify our greatest warriors for the simple joy of conquering them. They turned their planet's violence into art, into stories, into the very foundation of their character." General Vexmore scoffed. "Primitive savagery, our modern technology would—" "Your technology," Elder Zixani's voice cut through his words like a blade, "is designed by minds that evolved on worlds where survival was predictable, where safety could be achieved through logic and preparation. Human minds were forged in chaos, shaped by millennia of facing impossible odds, and finding ways to not just survive, but to prevail. She gestured toward the holographic Earth, and the image zoomed in to show the planet's surface. Cities sprawled across continents, lights twinkling like stars against the darkness. When they reached for the stars, they didn't do it the way we did, with careful calculation and gradual expansion. They strapped themselves to controlled explosions and hurled themselves into the void with the same reckless courage their ancestors used to sail into unknown oceans. They colonized worlds we deemed uninhabitable, not because they had to, but because someone told them it was impossible. Kethvar found himself nodding along with many other delegates. The human expansion had been unprecedented. In the span of a few short centuries, they had established thriving colonies on worlds that other species wouldn't visit without full environmental suits. "This is all very poetic," General Vexmore interrupted, "but it doesn't change the fact that the hegemony needs those resources. The asteroid belt contains rare minerals essential to our expansion." "Then request permission," High Counselor Mordoon said firmly. "Follow the protocols established by the Accords." "And if the humans refuse?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the chamber knew that humans rarely refused reasonable requests. They were, by most accounts, surprisingly diplomatic for a species with such a violent reputation, but they were also notoriously protective of their territory. Elder Zixani's form seemed to shimmer as she prepared to descend back into her meditation pod. "General Vexmore, let me share one more piece of history with you. The last time someone decided to test human resolve directly, it was the Cretan Empire. They were convinced that humans were nothing more than savage children playing with stolen technology." "What happened to them?" asked a junior delegate from the Zephyrian section. "Nothing," the elder replied. "Nothing at all. One day they were there, the next day they simply weren't. Their worlds were empty, their fleets gone, their entire civilization erased so thoroughly that we only know they existed because of our historical records." "You're suggesting humans committed genocide?" General Vexmore's voice carried a note of challenge. "No," Elder Zixani said, as her pod began to seal. "I'm suggesting that we never found out what humans are truly capable of when they stop holding back, and the Cretan Empire was the only civilization foolish enough to find out." As the elder's pod descended into the depths of the chamber, General Vexmore looked around at the assembled delegates. Kethvar could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the warnings against the hegemony's ambitions. "The hegemony appreciates the Council's concerns," Vexmore said finally, "but we are not the Cretan Empire. We understand humans better than our predecessors. We know their weaknesses." High Counselor Morden's crystalline form darkened, a sign of deep displeasure. "General, I strongly advise." "The decision has been made," Vexmore cut her off. "Hegemony mining operations will begin in the Sol system within the next cycle. Any interference will be considered an act of war." The general's delegation filed out of the chamber, leaving behind a stunned silence. Kethvar watched them go, feeling a cold dread settle in his stomach. In all his years of diplomatic service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something terrible was about to happen. "What do we do now?" asked Delegate Printa from the Outer Rim Coalition. High Counselor Mordoon's form continued to darken until she resembled a piece of obsidian shot through with veins of light. "We prepare for the consequences." "Should we warn the humans?" suggested another delegate. "Warn them of what?" Kethvar found himself speaking for the first time during the session. "That someone is about to make the same mistake that has been made before? They already know. They've always known that someone would eventually decide to test them again." As the council session ended and delegates began to file out, Kethvar remained in his seat, staring at the holographic Earth. He thought about the human diplomatic corps he had worked with over the years. Always polite, always reasonable, always seeming slightly amused by something the rest of the galaxy couldn't quite understand. Now he was beginning to suspect what that amusement was about. 3 days later, Kethvar was in his embassy office when his aide rushed in with an urgent communication. "Ambassador, we're receiving reports from our deep space monitoring stations. A hegemony battle fleet has entered the Sol system." Kethvar closed his eyes and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "How large?" 200 ships, sir, including their newest dreadnoughts. "And the human response?" His aide hesitated. "That's just it, sir. There hasn't been one. No mobilization of their fleet, no emergency broadcasts, no diplomatic protests, nothing." Kethvar opened his eyes and looked out his office window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the hegemony was about to learn a lesson that civilizations had been learning for millennia. But this time, the entire galaxy would be watching. "Contact the council," he ordered. "Tell them we need an emergency session." "What should I tell them it's regarding?" Kethvar stood and began gathering his files. "Tell them we need to discuss refugee resettlement procedures." "Refugees, sir? From where?" "From the hegemony," Kethvar replied quietly. "What's left of it?" As his aide rushed to make the communication, Kethvar found himself remembering something a human diplomat had once told him at a trade summit. They had been discussing the various military doctrines of different species when the human had smiled that same mysterious smile and said, "You know, Ambassador, the funny thing about humanity is that we've never actually fought a war in space." At the time, Kethvar had assumed the human meant they were inexperienced. Now, as reports began flooding in from the Sol system, he realized the human had meant something else entirely. They had never fought a war in space because they had never needed to. The hegemony was about to discover what happened when humanity finally did. Admiral Thexara of the Hegemony First Fleet stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Inevitable Victory, and watched as Sol System's asteroid belt grew larger on the view screen. Around her, the crew moved with the practiced efficiency of a military force that had conquered dozens of worlds. "All mining vessels are in position, Admiral," reported her tactical officer. "No sign of human interference." Thexara nodded, though she felt a nagging unease that she couldn't quite place. Intelligence reports had assured her that humanity's space-based military was minimal, focused primarily on system patrol vessels and a few outdated dreadnoughts. Nothing that could threaten a modern hegemony battle fleet. "Begin mining operations," she ordered. As the massive mining ships moved into position around the larger asteroids, Thexara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. General Vexmore had been right. The galaxy's fear of humanity was nothing more than ancient superstition, stories told to frighten children. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and suddenly Thexara was looking at a human male in what appeared to be a simple military uniform. No ornate decorations, no elaborate ceremonial armor, just a plain uniform with a few small insignia. "This is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force," the human said calmly. "You are currently conducting unauthorized mining operations in sovereign human space. Please cease these operations and withdraw from the system immediately." Thexara stepped forward, allowing her full 7-foot height to dominate the screen. "I am Admiral Thexara of the Hegemony First Fleet. This system is now under hegemony control. Surrender your vessels and prepare to be boarded." The human's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed almost tired. "Admiral Thexara," he said quietly, "I'm going to give you one more chance to reconsider. Please withdraw your forces and return to hegemony space. This is your final warning." Thexara's laugh echoed across the bridge. "You're outnumbered 10-1, human. Your pathetic patrol ships are no match for hegemony war technology. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, there was something in his voice that made Thexara's tactical instincts suddenly scream danger. "Admiral," he said softly, "you misunderstand. Those aren't patrol ships." The transmission ended, leaving Thexara staring at a blank screen. "Sensors," she barked. "Full tactical sweep. I want to know the location and capabilities of every human vessel in this system." Her sensor officer bent over his console, then straightened with a confused expression. "Admiral, sensors show only 12 human vessels. All appear to be civilian transports or small patrol craft." Thexara felt her unease deepen. 12 ships against 200. Even with superior technology, the mathematics didn't make sense. Unless... "Admiral!" The communications officer's voice cracked with panic. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Hegemony Command. General Vexmore is requesting immediate status reports from all fleet commanders. Tell him we've encountered no resistance and mining operations are proceeding as planned." "Ma'am, the transmission, it's not coming from Hegemony space. It's coming from inside the system." Thexara felt ice form in her veins. "Impossible. General Vexmore is at headquarters 3 sectors away." "The transmission is definitely from inside the system, Admiral, approximately 2 light minutes from our position." As if summoned by her growing fear, another transmission appeared on the main screen. This time it was General Vexmore himself, but something was wrong with the image. The general appeared to be in some kind of detention cell, still wearing his dress uniform, but looking significantly less imposing than he had in the council chamber. "Fleet commanders," he said, his voice strained. "Disregard previous orders. Withdraw immediately. Do not engage human forces under any circumstances. This is a direct order from your commanding officer." The transmission ended, leaving Thexara's bridge in stunned silence. "How is this possible?" whispered her tactical officer. Before anyone could answer, the sensor officer's voice rose to near panic. "Admiral, new contacts! Multiple ships decloaking throughout the system!" On the view screen, space itself seemed to ripple and tear as ship after ship materialized from nowhere. They appeared with the smooth, terrifying inevitability of a nightmare becoming real. But these weren't the sleek, elegant vessels favored by most galactic civilizations. These ships looked like they had been built for one purpose only, to survive anything the universe could throw at them and keep fighting. "How many?" Thexara asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Still counting, Admiral. Current tally is 800 and rising." 800. Against her fleet of 200. "Admiral Chen to Hegemony Forces," came the calm voice over the communications system. "You now have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal procedures. Any vessel that has not started moving away from human space in exactly 30 seconds will be considered a hostile target and dealt with accordingly." Thexara looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These were veteran soldiers who had faced down the best the galaxy had to offer. But now she saw something in their eyes she had never seen before. Fear. "Admiral," her tactical officer said quietly, "recommend immediate withdrawal. 20 seconds. All ships," Thexara announced over the fleet channel, "begin withdrawal immediately. Set course for the system edge, maximum speed." As the Hegemony fleet began to turn away from the asteroid belt, Thexara couldn't help but look back at the human ships now surrounding them. They moved with a predatory grace that spoke of technologies far beyond anything in Hegemony databases. "Admiral," came Admiral Chen's voice one more time, "thank you for making the wise choice. Have a safe journey home." As the inevitable victory reached the edge of the Sol system, Thexara realized that humanity had just taught the Hegemony a lesson without firing a single shot. They had demonstrated a technological superiority so complete that resistance would have been not just futile, but suicidal. But more importantly, They had done it with the same quiet politeness they showed in every diplomatic encounter. Thexara had the growing suspicion that the galaxy was about to learn what humans were really like when they stopped being polite. Ambassador Kethvar stood in the Emergency Council session, watching as holographic displays showed the aftermath of what was already being called the Sol Incident. The hegemony fleet had withdrawn without a shot being fired, but the implications of what had happened were only beginning to sink in. 800 ships, High Counselor Mordun repeated for the third time, her crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated deep distress. Our intelligence estimated human naval capacity at fewer than 50 vessels. Clearly our intelligence was wrong, muttered Delegate Printa from the Outer Rim Coalition. Elder Zixani's meditation pod had been brought up from the depths of the chamber, and her ancient voice carried across the assembly. Not wrong, incomplete. Humans have always been selective about what they allow others to see. Kethvar activated his speaking platform. With respect, Elder, how is it possible that we missed such a massive military buildup? Our sensor networks monitor every major shipyard in known space. The Elder's black eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the chamber walls. Because you were looking for shipyards like yours, Ambassador. Grand orbital facilities, massive construction platforms, the kind of infrastructure every other civilization requires to build a fleet. Are you suggesting they built 800 ships somewhere else? I'm suggesting, the Elder said slowly, that humans don't build fleets the way we do. They don't think like we do. When faced with a problem, most species look for the most logical, efficient solution. Humans look for the solution that works, regardless of whether it makes sense to anyone else. Before anyone could respond to this cryptic statement, an urgent chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The main display shifted to show Admiral Chen, the same human who had given the hegemony their final warning. "Honored counselors," he said with the same calm demeanor he had shown during the standoff. "I apologize for interrupting your session, but we felt it was important to address some concerns that may have arisen from recent events." High Counselor Mordun's form brightened slightly. "Admiral Chen, the Council appreciates your reaching out. We have many questions about—" "I'm sure you do," the Admiral interrupted politely, "and I'll answer what I can. But first, there are some things the Council needs to understand about the current situation." The holographic display behind Admiral Chen shifted to show a star map of local space. Red indicators marked hegemony territory, while blue showed the various member worlds of the Galactic Council. But there was something else on the map now, something that made Kethvar's blood run cold. Yellow indicators. Hundreds of them, spread throughout the galaxy like drops of sunlight scattered across the void. "These represent current human naval positions," Admiral Chen explained. "As you can see, our capability to respond to threats is more comprehensive than previously understood." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Kethvar counted the yellow indicators and felt his worldview shifting. There weren't 800 human ships. There were thousands. "How?" whispered someone from the Thraxian delegation. Admiral Chen's expression remained unchanged. "Earth's industrial capacity has always been underestimated by galactic intelligence services. This is largely because you've been looking for the kind of centralized production facilities used by other civilizations. Humans prefer a more distributed approach. You've hidden entire fleets from our sensors," accused General Mortan of the Veltar Confederacy. "Not hidden," Admiral Chen corrected. "Simply not advertised. Humans have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. We've been speaking softly for quite some time." Kethvar found his voice. "Admiral, with respect, this revelation raises serious questions about human intentions. The Council has always operated under the assumption that humanity posed no significant military threat to galactic stability. For the first time, Admiral Chen's expression shifted slightly. Not to anger, but to something that might have been sadness. Ambassador Kethvar, isn't it? When Kethvar nodded, the Admiral continued. I remember your work during the Rigel trade disputes. Excellent diplomacy. You helped prevent a war that would have cost millions of lives. Thank you, Admiral, but... My point, Chen interrupted gently, is that humanity has no interest in threatening galactic stability. We want the same thing every other civilized species wants: peace, prosperity, and the freedom to explore the universe without having to constantly watch our backs. Then why the massive military buildup? Demanded the Veltar general. Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that reminded Kethvar of Elder Zixani. General Mortan, how many wars has your species fought in the last 1,000 years? The Veltar have engaged in 17 military conflicts during that period, the general replied proudly. And how many of those were wars of conquest versus defensive actions? The general's posture stiffened. All Veltar military actions have been defensive in nature. I'm sure they were, Admiral Chen said without a trace of sarcasm. Now, can you guess how many wars humanity has fought in the same period? The chamber fell silent as delegates considered the question. Human expansion had been remarkably peaceful by galactic standards. Even their colonization of contested worlds had been achieved through negotiation rather than force. None. Admiral Chen answered his own question. Humanity has not fought a single interstellar war, not one. Do you want to know why? Please enlighten us, High Counselor Mordoon said. Because everyone knows what humans are like when they're angry, Admiral Chen replied simply. The galaxy has spent centuries telling stories about human savagery, about our violent nature, about what happens when we're provoked. Those stories aren't entirely wrong, but they're not entirely right either. The holographic display shifted again, showing historical images that Kethvar recognized from various databases: human cities, human art, human achievements in science and technology. Humans are capable of incredible violence, Admiral Chen continued. But we're also capable of incredible creation. We build cities and destroy them in wars, then rebuild them even better than before. We write poetry about the beauty of the universe while simultaneously developing weapons that could crack planets. This is precisely what concerns us, interrupted Delegate Printa. A species capable of such contradictions is a species that understands both sides of existence, Admiral Chen finished. We know what it costs to build something beautiful, so we also know what it costs to destroy it. This knowledge makes us very careful about when and how we choose to act. Elder Zixani's voice drifted across the chamber like an ancient wind. Admiral, are you saying that humanity's military might exist as a deterrent rather than a weapon? I'm saying, Admiral Chen replied, that humanity learned a long time ago that the best way to avoid a fight is to make sure everyone knows you can win it. The implications of this statement rippled through the assembly like a shockwave. Kethvar found himself reassessing every diplomatic interaction he had ever had with human representatives. Their calm confidence, their willingness to make reasonable compromises, their apparent lack of concern about military threats from other species. They hadn't been weak or naive. They had been negotiating from a position of overwhelming strength while allowing everyone else to believe otherwise. The Sol incident, Admiral Chen continued, was unfortunate. The hegemony leadership was operating under false assumptions about human capabilities. We chose to correct those assumptions in the least destructive way possible. By revealing your true military strength, observed High Counselor Morden. By revealing a fraction of our military strength, Admiral Chen corrected. The 800 ships you've been discussing represent approximately 3% of active human naval forces. The number hit the assembly like a physical blow. Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus cycle frantically as he tried to process the implications. If 800 ships was only 3%. You're describing a military force capable of conquering the entire galaxy, General Mortan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Admiral Chen agreed simply. We are. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began shouting questions and demands all at once, but Admiral Chen simply waited, his expression unchanged, until the noise died down. However, he said when silence returned, conquest has never been humanity's goal. We're explorers, not conquerors. We're builders, not destroyers. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us, and we intend to keep it that way. What about the hegemony? Asked Delegate Printa. What happens to them now? Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful. The hegemony leadership made a serious error in judgment, but their people are not responsible for the decisions of their government. Humanitarian operations are already underway to ensure that civilian populations are protected during the transition period. Transition to what? To new leadership, Admiral Chen replied. Leaders who understand that cooperation serves everyone's interests better than conquest. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just repelled the hegemony's aggression, they had effectively ended the hegemony as a galactic power, and they had done it so quickly and efficiently that most of the galaxy was only now learning it had happened. Admiral Kethvar said carefully, what does humanity expect from the Council moving forward? Nothing different than what we've always expected, Admiral Chen replied. Fair trade, open communication, peaceful resolution of disputes, and respect for sovereign boundaries. The same things every civilized species should expect. And if someone else decides to test human resolve? For the first time during the transmission, Admiral Chen smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Ambassador, humanity has been preparing for this conversation for over 2 centuries. We've hoped it would never be necessary, but we've been ready nonetheless. The galaxy now knows what humans are capable of when we act with restraint and mercy. He paused, and his smile disappeared. I would strongly advise against giving the galaxy a demonstration of what we're capable of when we don't. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Elder Zixani was the first to speak. Well, she said with what might have been amusement, I suppose the age of underestimating humanity has come to an end. Over the following days, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Hegemony worlds were surrendering without resistance as humanitarian fleets arrived to oversee peaceful transitions of government. Former hegemony military commanders were being offered positions in new planetary defense forces under human oversight. Civilian populations were reporting better living conditions under the interim governments than they had experienced under hegemony rule. It was, by any measure, the most benevolent conquest in galactic history. But Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that conquest wasn't the right word. It was more like adoption. Humanity was taking responsibility for the hegemony's former territories, not as a conqueror, but as a parent taking in orphaned children. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified him. Because if humanity was willing to take responsibility for the hegemony's mistakes, what did that say about their long-term plans for the galaxy? 3 weeks after the Saul incident, Kethvar received an invitation that changed everything he thought he knew about human intentions. The message was simple and direct. Ambassador Kethvar, your diplomatic expertise has been noted by the Human Colonial Administration. We would be honored to have you visit our primary shipbuilding facility to observe our industrial capabilities firsthand. This invitation is extended in the interests of transparent communication and mutual understanding. The message was signed by Director Sarah Martinez, Industrial Coordination Division. Kethvar stared at the invitation for a long time before responding. Humans were offering to show him their shipyards, the very facilities that every intelligence service in the galaxy had been trying to locate for decades. Either this was a gesture of unprecedented trust, or humanity was confident enough in their position that they no longer cared who knew the truth. 2 days later, Kethvar found himself aboard a human transport vessel heading toward coordinates that didn't match any known stellar phenomenon. The ship's captain, a pleasant woman named Jackson, seemed genuinely excited to be giving him a tour. "You're in for quite a sight, Ambassador," she said, as they approached their destination. "Most people don't realize the scope of what we've built out here." When the transport dropped out of hyperspace, Kethvar understood why human shipbuilding facilities had never been detected. They hadn't built shipyards. They had built cities. Vast rotating habitats stretched across the void, connected by streams of cargo vessels and transport ships. Each habitat was the size of a small moon, and there were dozens of them arranged in a complex orbital pattern around a system of artificial stars. "Welcome to New Geneva," Captain Jackson announced proudly. "Population: approximately 40 million humans and allied species. Primary industries: starship construction, advanced manufacturing, and technological research." Kethvar could barely speak. "How long has this existed?" "This particular complex? About 150 years, but it's just one of 17 major industrial systems we've established in the local galactic region." 17. Kethvar felt his worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself moment by moment. "The beautiful thing about space construction," Captain Jackson continued as their transport approached one of the massive habitats, "is that you're not limited by planetary gravity or atmospheric conditions. We can build things here that would be impossible on any world." As they docked with the habitat, Kethvar saw through the viewports into the vast interior spaces where starships were being assembled. Not the sleek, elegant vessels favored by most galactic civilizations, but massive, heavily armored ships designed for purposes he couldn't even guess at. "Those are colony ships," Captain Jackson explained, following his gaze. "Each one can carry 1 million people and everything they need to establish a self-sustaining civilization on any world they choose." "How many are you building?" "Currently, about 200 per year across all our industrial systems." The mathematics were staggering. At that rate, humanity could colonize hundreds of new worlds every year if they chose to. They could spread across the galaxy like a tide, establishing human presence on every habitable planet in known space within a few centuries. "But why show me this?" Kethvar asked as they disembarked into the habitat's vast corridors. "Why reveal capabilities that you've kept secret for so long?" Captain Jackson's smile was warm and genuine. "Because secrets breed suspicion, and suspicion breeds conflict. Humanity has spent 2 centuries building the capability to defend ourselves and our allies. Now that everyone knows we have that capability, we can focus on building other things." "Such as?" "Hospitals," she replied simply. "Schools, art galleries, concert halls, all the things that make life worth living." As they walked through the habitat's residential sections, Kethvar saw exactly what she meant. This wasn't just an industrial facility. It was a complete civilization. Children of a dozen different species played in parks under artificial suns, while their parents worked in laboratories and workshops. Artists from across the galaxy displayed their work in galleries that had been carved from asteroids and transformed into spaces of incredible beauty. "This is what humanity builds when we're not worried about being attacked," Captain Jackson explained. "This is what we want the galaxy to look like." That evening, as Kethvar prepared his report for the Council, he realized that everything had changed. Humanity had revealed their true nature not as conquerors or destroyers, but as builders on a scale that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. They had the power to dominate known space completely, and they were using it to create something unprecedented. a civilization where every species could thrive according to their nature while contributing to a greater whole. The age of fearing humanity was over. The age of learning from them was about to begin. 5 years after the Sol incident, Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching as ships from 1,000 different worlds moved through the void in perfect coordination. The massive space station served as the new hub of galactic commerce and diplomacy, built not by any single species, but through the combined efforts of dozens of civilizations working together. It was humanity's vision made real. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a familiar voice behind him. Kethvar turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, though the human now wore the simple robes of a civilian administrator rather than a military uniform. In the 5 years since their first meeting, Chen had transitioned from naval command to heading the newly formed Galactic Cooperation Initiative. "Admiral," Kethvar said, then caught himself. "Forgive me, Director Chen." "Admiral is fine," Chen replied with a smile. "Old habits die hard. I take it the council session went well?" Kethvar nodded, though his expression was thoughtful. The council had just voted unanimously to approve the newest phase of what was being called the Great Project, a coordinated effort to terraform and colonize an entire spiral arm of the galaxy, creating thousands of new worlds capable of supporting life. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Kethvar admitted. 5 years ago, we were debating mining rights. Now we're planning to remake the stars themselves. Chen joined him at the observation window, watching as a Thraxian construction vessel worked alongside a human engineering ship to install massive atmospheric processors on a nearby habitat. The cooperation between species that had once viewed each other with suspicion was remarkable to witness. "Change was inevitable," Chen said quietly. "The old way of doing things, where each species carved out their own territory and defended it jealously, was never sustainable in the long term. The galaxy is too big and too dangerous for small, isolated civilizations to survive indefinitely." "You knew this would happen," Kethvar observed. "Even before the Sol incident, humanity was planning for this outcome." Chen was quiet for a moment. "We hoped for it. There's a difference between planning and hoping, Ambassador. Planning assumes you can control outcomes. Hope acknowledges that you can't, but that you can prepare yourself to respond when opportunities arise." Through the window, they watched as a massive human colony ship emerged from hyperspace, its hull scarred with the marks of a long journey from the frontier regions. Kethvar had learned that such ships regularly returned to Unity Station, carrying not just reports of new discoveries, but refugees from failing civilizations, survivors of natural disasters, and anyone else who needed help starting over. "The hegemony territories," Kethvar said. "The integration is proceeding better than anyone expected." "Former hegemony territories," Chen corrected gently. "They're independent worlds now, free to choose their own governments and destinies. We're just available to help if they need it." The transformation of the hegemony's former empire had been perhaps the most remarkable outcome of the Sol incident. Rather than being absorbed into human territory, each world had been given the resources and support needed to establish stable democratic governments. Many had chosen to join the expanding network of human-allied worlds, but others had opted for independence while maintaining trade and diplomatic relationships. None had been forced into any particular choice. "The Veltar Confederacy is requesting human advisors for their military reforms," Kethvar mentioned. "General Mortan specifically requested that humans help them transition from a conquest-based military to a defense-focused one." Chen chuckled. 5 years ago, General Mortan was demanding to know why humans were hiding fleets. Now he wants to learn from our strategic doctrines. It's remarkable how perspectives change. "What did you tell him?" The same thing we tell everyone. We're happy to share our knowledge with anyone who wants to use it for constructive purposes. The Veltar have a proud warrior tradition, but they're learning that the greatest victories don't always come from defeating enemies. Kethvar nodded. The Veltar military academies were now teaching courses on disaster relief, humanitarian aid, and peacekeeping alongside traditional combat training. Their warriors were being deployed to help with colony establishment and infrastructure development rather than territorial expansion. "Director," Kethvar said carefully, "may I ask you something that's been bothering me for years?" "Of course." "Why didn't humanity reveal their true capabilities earlier? You could have prevented countless conflicts, saved millions of lives if the galaxy had known what you were capable of." Chen was quiet for a long time, watching the ships move through space in their eternal dance of commerce and exploration. "Because," he said eventually, "knowledge of power changes people, not always for the better. If the galaxy had known humanity's true capabilities from the beginning, every interaction would have been colored by fear or ambition. Species would have either tried to appease us or challenge us, but very few would have simply worked with us as equals. But now they know. Now they know, and they also know what humanity chooses to do with that power. There's a difference between being afraid of someone's strength and respecting their wisdom." Kethvar considered this. It was true that the galaxy's relationship with humanity had evolved far beyond simple fear or deference. Human advisors and experts were now present in virtually every major galactic institution, not as overlords, but as partners and teachers. Their influence was vast, but it was the influence of expertise and experience rather than military might. "The Zephyrian Empire wants to discuss the deep space exploration project," Kethvar said, changing the subject. "They're offering to contribute their long-range survey ships to the effort." "Excellent," Chen replied. "The Zephyrians have some of the best navigation technology in known space. Combined with human engineering and Thraxian construction capabilities, we should be able to map and explore regions of the galaxy that have been beyond reach for millennia." The Deep Space Exploration Project was perhaps humanity's most ambitious undertaking yet, sending joint fleets of ships beyond the galactic rim to explore the vast spaces between galaxies. The technology required was staggering, but the combined resources and expertise of dozens of species made it possible. "Do you really think we'll find anything out there?" Kethvar asked. Chen's smile was enigmatic. "Ambassador, humans have a saying. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Whether we find new life, new worlds, or just empty space, the act of exploring together is valuable in itself. You're talking about building unity through shared purpose. I'm talking about giving every species in the galaxy something bigger than themselves to work toward. When you're focused on exploring the infinite, arguments about territorial boundaries and resource distribution seem pretty small in comparison." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Chen activated his personal communicator, listened briefly, then smiled. "Speaking of exploration, the Deep Space Survey Fleet just reported back from the Andromeda approach mission. They've detected signs of intelligent life in the neighboring galaxy." Kethvar felt his breathing apparatus cycle rapidly. Intelligent life? What kind of signs? Organized radio transmissions, large-scale stellar engineering projects, evidence of spaceflight capability. It appears we're not alone in the local galactic cluster. The implications were staggering. Contact with an entirely separate galactic civilization would change everything humanity and their allies had been working toward. "How long before contact becomes possible?" Kethvar asked. "With current technology? Several centuries at least." "But the human colonial administration is already working on theoretical frameworks for peaceful contact protocols. You're planning for contact with beings we haven't even met yet." "We're planning for every possibility we can imagine," Chen replied. It's what humans do. We hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and try to build systems that can handle anything in between. As if summoned by their conversation, Director Martinez appeared on the observation deck. The human woman who had once shown Kethvar the new Geneva shipyards now oversaw industrial development across hundreds of worlds. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said warmly, "I hoped I'd find you here. I wanted to personally thank you for the Zephyrian Empire's contribution to the terraforming initiative. Those atmospheric processing units they developed are going to cut decades off our timeline for making worlds habitable." "The Zephyrians are honored to contribute," Kethvar replied, "though I think they're more excited about the archaeological surveys you're planning for the ancient worlds in the Outer Rim." "Ah, yes," Martinez said with obvious enthusiasm. "The ruins on Keth Prime are particularly intriguing. Preliminary scans suggest a civilization that reached technological advancement comparable to current galactic standards, then simply vanished. No signs of war, no environmental collapse, just empty cities and abandoned infrastructure." Chen's expression grew more serious. "We've found similar sites on 17 different worlds now, all showing the same pattern. Advanced civilizations that reached a certain level of development, then disappeared without any obvious cause." "Do you think they're connected?" Kethvar asked. "Almost certainly," Martinez replied. "The time frames align too closely for coincidence. Something happened to multiple advanced civilizations simultaneously, roughly 50,000 years ago. The mystery of the vanished civilizations had become one of the galaxy's most pressing questions. Joint archaeological teams from dozens of species were working to uncover the truth, but so far the evidence raised more questions than it answered." "Whatever happened to them," Chen said quietly, "we need to make sure it doesn't happen to us. One of the advantages of the current cooperative structure is that if any threat emerges, we'll face it together rather than as isolated species." Kethvar nodded, though the thought was sobering. The galaxy's new unity was built on hope and mutual benefit, but it might ultimately be tested by challenges they couldn't yet imagine. "There's something else," Martinez said, her tone growing more formal. "The Council approved the proposal for the Great Archive project. Construction will begin within the next cycle. The Great Archive was perhaps humanity's most philosophical undertaking. A massive facility designed to preserve the complete history, culture, and knowledge of every known species. Not just as historical record, but as a living repository that would continue to grow and evolve as galactic civilization developed. Every story," Chen explained to Kethvar, "every song, every scientific discovery, every work of art, every philosophical insight, all preserved and accessible to future generations, regardless of what happens to any individual world or species. You're planning for the possibility that civilizations might be lost again. We're ensuring that if civilizations are lost, their contributions won't be," Martinez corrected. "Knowledge and wisdom are too precious to risk losing to the hazards of time." As they spoke, more ships arrived at Unity Station, research vessels returning from distant surveys, colony ships heading out to establish new settlements, trade vessels carrying goods between worlds that had never interacted before the new age of cooperation began. Each ship represented connections between species, bridges built across the vast distances that had once isolated civilizations from each other. "Ambassador," Chen said as they prepared to leave the observation deck, "I know this isn't the galaxy any of us expected to see when we started our careers in diplomacy. Are you satisfied with how things have developed?" Kethvar considered the question carefully. 5 years ago, he had been a diplomat trying to maintain peace between species that viewed each other with suspicion at best and hostility at worst. Now he was part of a cooperative effort that spanned thousands of worlds and was actively working to ensure that no species would ever again have to face the unknown alone. Satisfied? He said eventually. No, I don't think I'm satisfied. Satisfaction implies that the work is complete. And it's not complete? Kethvar gestured toward the vast panorama of space visible through the observation windows, where ships moved between stars on missions of exploration, construction, and discovery. Director, we've barely begun. We've learned to work together within one galaxy, but there are billions of other galaxies out there. We've solved the immediate problems of territorial conflicts and resource competition, but we haven't yet addressed the deeper questions of what intelligent life is ultimately meant to accomplish in this universe. Chen's smile was warm with approval. That sounds like a very human perspective, Ambassador. Perhaps, Kethvar replied. Working with humans has changed my way of thinking. I no longer see problems as things to be managed or contained. I see them as opportunities to build something better than what existed before. And what do you think we should build next? Kethvar was quiet for a moment, watching as a massive human construction ship began assembling the framework for what would become another habitat, another place where beings from across the galaxy could live and work together toward common goals. Everything, he said finally. We should build everything we can imagine, and then build the tools to imagine even more. We should explore every star, map every world, decode every mystery the universe has hidden from us. We should create art and music and literature that celebrates not just individual species, but the incredible diversity of what life can become when it's free to reach its potential. That's a very ambitious agenda, Martinez observed with a smile. Director, Kethvar replied, I learned from humanity that the point isn't to set reasonable goals. The point is to set goals worth achieving, then find ways to make them possible. As the three of them left the observation deck and returned to their various duties, Kethvar reflected on the changes the galaxy had seen in just 5 short years. The Sol incident had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone had expected. It hadn't been the demonstration of human military might that transformed galactic civilization. It had been the demonstration of human vision, the revelation that there were beings in the universe who thought in terms of building rather than conquering, of including rather than excluding, of creating rather than destroying. The galaxy had learned that humanity was powerful enough to dominate known space completely. But more importantly, it had learned that humanity was wise enough to choose not to. And in that choice, every other species had found the freedom to become more than they had ever been before. The age of small thinking was over. The age of building the future together had begun. And according to humanity's most fundamental nature, the best was yet to come.